Hi, I'm Isaac Lamb, and this is Everybody's Got a Song.
Nope.
Nope! Hello, I'm Isaac Lamb, and this is Everybody Has a Song.
All right, my friend, I'm very excited that you're here today. The last time we were together, we produced a show.
We sure did, Ty.
And it was almost a year. No, I guess a little.
Well, half a year maybe, yeah.
Half a year maybe.
Yeah.
What have you been up to since?
We went right after we produced Hair. I took a little break. That show was a big one and took a lot out of me, and so I took a little vacation afterwards, and then I spent a lot of time with my kids. I have twin 5-year-olds, and I spent some time with them, just kind of getting my feet back underneath me again. And then I've begun working on actually 3 separate projects. So I'm a part of a creative team that's writing a musical, a jazz musical about a woman named Dazama Muriel, who was a local Oregon historical figure who's kind of been forgotten by the world. And she was one of the first female conductors of a professional orchestra in the United States at a time when women were hardly allowed to play in professional orchestras, let alone conduct them. And so she lived this kind of like Forrest Gump extraordinary life where she studied under Toscanini and like rode her bicycle across the country to apply for a symphony job in Georgia, and like hopped trains. She developed this collection of musical instruments that she would take around in this like old beater Model T Ford truck and teach young people about the history of world music, and then also teach them how to play. So she lived this like really extraordinary life, wrote and self-published an autobiography, and we just kind of like this creative team sort of happened upon her estate and discovered this woman, and we've been diving into her history, and it's kind of strange that she was not a more notable figure in Oregon history. And so we're writing a musical about her life and about maybe why she didn't make the mark that she so clearly wanted to make, or the lasting legacy that she wanted. So that's a really interesting project. We've been working on that. It's going to open the Mountain Jazz Festival.
Oh wow!
Yeah, a concert staging of it.
And you can say that in public?
Yes,
okay.
I can say that in public. Yeah.
It's amazing to me how many underrepresented voices whose story should be told exist here in Oregon.
Yeah.
Because when I moved here last fall, there was a Black activist by the name of Beatrice Morrow Kennedy, who was the first African-American woman to go to law school. And she lived here in Oregon, and I toured with the Portland Opera singing her story.
Oh, wow.
So it's amazing how we are coming across these powerful women to tell stories that everybody should potentially know.
Right. Folks should know these stories, yeah. I mean, Oregon has a pretty fraught history with racism, and it was originally founded as an exclusionary state where Black people weren't allowed to actually live here. And yet, as is true of most history, where peoples are underrepresented and oppressed, still existed, still made incredible music, still did these extraordinary things, and so their stories deserve to be excavated and told, and so we're trying to do that for at least one of them. Yeah.
How do you, as an actor, a director, a musician, how do you choose what plays, productions you want to do? Is there a process? What do you say no to?
Well, that answer's changed, I think, over the course of my career. I had a friend who used to say, you do a project for the art, the part, the yucks, or the bucks. And if you can get 2 of those things, it's probably a job worth saying yes to. If you can get 3, man, you'd be crazy to turn it down. And nobody ever gets 4, really. So I tend to say no to things that are only 1. I tend to not try to do things just for the money. Or if art is really good but it doesn't pay anything, there's a lot of, when it's just one thing, you kind of like have to really decide what's worth it to me. And so I use that actually, the art, the part, the yucks or the bucks. Is this something I really want to do? Are my collaborators people that I really want to work with? Is it a story really worth telling? Does it pay? Does it pay well? No joke. Like that's something you really have to consider as a freelance artist. And so I try to get a couple of those things, and not too greedy, so I don't expect to get all of them, but those are the terms I think upon which I really like reflect whether this job is worth taking or not.
You know how much I appreciate you, and I love who you are as a person, and it's also reflective in your answer where it's not all about the money.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very important lesson for young people coming up as artists and people who are trying to find their voice in this space, right? If you're creating good art and you're a good person, then that money will come.
Yeah.
Right? So
I do feel strongly that you can't really be too much on either side of it, right? If it's all about the money, you should probably do something else because there isn't a lot of money in the arts in America.
Right.
There just isn't, you know. Should it be that way? No, but that's the way that it is. So, right, there's the world you want to live in, and then there's the world you actually do live in. Should it only be this passion thing that you do? No, because it takes real work and real sweat equity and a lot of time and effort to make art and to make art well. So you should be compensated for your time. So the thing I try to tell my students, that I tell young artists who are coming up is have realistic expectations, set realistic expectations for what a life in the arts looks like. And I try to be honest that like I have to work a lot to make a living at it. And also recognize what you get out of that willingness to do something that's very difficult and not always guarantees like the security of finance or financial security. What you get in exchange is you get to feel alive in a way that you wouldn't if you weren't doing your art or weren't creating something. I wish that we didn't have to make that exchange. I wish we could pay artists what they're worth. I wish that we could pay artists the same as we pay doctors and lawyers and all of these other professions that are well compensated and extremely critical to society, because I think we're no less important. But yeah, I think it's important to have a realistic notion of what a life in the arts looks like. And also to know, like, you do get things out of it that other people don't. I mean, there are probably accountants out there who really love accounting and who are really like turned on by numbers. So good, good for them. But I also feel like we get a unique ability to feel alive when we're making art. Absolutely. And to be a part of like a cultural conversation that not everybody gets the privilege of doing. So there are some trade-offs.
Would you say, is there a show or a production that you regret not saying yes to?
Ooh, man, that's a good question. So many. I mean, I feel like in that calculus of trying to figure out, is this project something I want to say yes to or not? Very often, and it sounds really easy to say, like, that goes in that category and that goes in that category. But a lot of the time, you've got projects coming to you that overlap, and so you have to decide which of these projects do I want to say yes to. I can't do both. I don't have time for both, or they don't allow me to do both. So do I want to be in this show over here that I've really wanted to be in? Or do I want to direct this show over here? And I think that's one of the things that I try to like tell people is to be a theater artist, particularly, that's the realm that I tend to swim in the most. You have to do a lot of things. I direct, but I also act, I sing, I dance, I do all the things so that I can be multidisciplinary and I can work more than not. But oftentimes what that does is it sets projects against each other, And so you have to start to get really good at figuring out, well, right now, where I am right now, which of these makes the most sense to me? And sometimes that's like, I gotta pay my bills. So I really want to do this passion project over here, but a theater like Portland Center Stage is doing hair and they offer me, so you take the paycheck in that case, and you hope that rises also to an artistic standard that you're proud of, and you try to keep. It's not like you just abandon the art for the money, and then sometimes you think, you know what, I'm okay financially. I'm okay right now. My kids are eating, so there's food on the table. Maybe I can afford to do this thing that pays me a little less well. And if you can get to a position in your career where I think you can be dexterous about that negotiation, then I think that's something to be really, really proud of. That means you've got a lot of options. You've developed good relationships with everybody that you've worked with, and you've kept yourself like invigorated with many different things. Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that because it's also teaching me that lesson as you say that. As a person who's a visual artist, a singer, someone who's trying to start this company, it's oftentimes difficult to know how much energy to put into one thing and stay afloat financially.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people who have passions, but they find it difficult to find the balance of focusing on their passion and staying afloat.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
And the ways that privilege sort of intersects with that conversation, right? That some people come from families with money and don't have to do quite as much calculus about like, well, I could take that passion project because mom and dad have got my back, or or I inherited some money or whatever. That we all sort of come from different stations in society, and so that negotiation is harder for somebody with less resources. It's harder for somebody with less privilege in society, and so it's easy for me as a white, straight, heterosexual man to say like, yeah, you have to do this balance, you have to do this negotiation, but I also acknowledge that like I come to this conversation with privilege as well. So I think it's important to acknowledge the role that plays, and that it's not going to be the same calculation for everyone. That some people will have different things to consider.
do you think that's a good point? You as a person who is aware of your privilege, as you've mentioned, do you think that it's important for you to make others aware of their privilege when they have it?
I think so. I mean, I have a little bit of I feel sometimes like if I'm making someone else aware of their privilege, like how am I being blind to my own?
Okay.
Like I do feel like a hesitancy sometimes to put myself in the position of saying I know more than somebody else, or that I think, artistically, if we're talking about like this career, sure, I've been doing it for 25 years and I really know a lot about the business. But I think in those terms, I think that's such a personal journey for most people. I try more often, rather than sort of telling people what I think they should do, I try to more often to just talk about the things that I do. And so hopefully, seeing someone with the privileges that I have is just a good example of living a life cognizant of those things, and that I can lead by example. And it's imperfect. I'm not always good at it, like I'm always struggling to get better at that conversation. I'm also always struggling to get better at recognizing my own blind spots. And so it's a lifelong journey and work that never ends. So stay committed to the work, and then hopefully others will too.
Right. And because we can't, how do I say this? No matter how much you try, the individual tries to convince somebody else to act differently, ultimately the decision is theirs.
Yeah.
Right? So the best that we can do is lead by example.
Yeah. And I think try to make the work that you want to see more of. Right. So I think that's part of it too for me, is trying to recognize in myself, in my assumptions and in my own history and my privileges and all of that, the ways that I'm coming up short or have blind spots, and then also trying to like figure that out in my work as well, and try to like change my work, diversify it, make it more equitable and inclusive, like incorporate different perspectives that are not my own into that work. I have the great fortune of being a director, sometime producer, who can choose to employ people, can choose to cast people or not cast people. And so I do have some power and control in that. So I often think to myself, like, am I being equitable? Am I being like the most open to new perspectives? And am I being really like critical of my own work? And hopefully if I'm doing that consistently enough, it will improve over time. And that as much as anything else will have an impact on other artists' lives. Is the more their work intersects with mine, the richer both of our works will be.
Yeah. Here's something for you.
Water.
Water. Brought to you by Le Croix. Imposter syndrome.
Oh.
Let's talk about that. I'll ask the question that I already know the answer to, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you deal with it, and how?
What if I was like, nope, don't have it? That'd be such a bad sign. I do. Of course I do. I don't think you can find an artist who has not at some point in their journey like encountered some pretty severe imposter syndrome. I think it shows up in different ways for different people, but I have a hugely, as my therapist likes to say to me, I have a hugely overdeveloped self-criticism muscle. And I think that's where it most often shows up is for me, like negative self-talk, and a fear of, it's like a fear of standing stiff in headwinds, I think sometimes it manifests itself in a way of just assuming I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know what I'm talking about, and so I don't, follow what is probably a really well considered vision necessarily, or I'm a little too I give in too much to like headwinds, and I think sometimes the lesson that I've learned over time is like what I really need to do is be a little more fearless in those circumstances and say, no, I have thought this through. I have a great deal of experience and a great deal of vision, and I'm going to pursue it, even if that costs me like what inside feels like, oh, you don't like me anymore, right? But actually, that's really rarely at stake, right? Especially if it's about artistic conversations. And if it is, like, so be it. The thing that, again, my therapist always tells me is like, you cannot attempt to control how people receive you in the world. And I think so much of our anxiety about whether we're good enough or not for a certain thing is actually about trying to control what other people receive from us, right? So much of it is like, are they going to think I'm good enough? Are they going to tell their friends I'm any good at this? And I've spent a lot of energy worrying about those kinds of things. I think the older I get, the more experienced I get better at saying, that's not up to me. That's actually none of my business. I can only do what I do, think critically about myself, and also just do my best. And then that goes out into the world, and how people receive that, whether they like it or not, whether it gets well reviewed or not, whether that gets me another job here or not, all of that is completely out of my control anyhow. No matter what I do, no matter how much I worry or how much I try to control the narrative or whatever, it's completely out of my control. And when you start to create from a place where you can release that, man, you start to like discover things about your work that you never knew.
You're almost limitless. I mean, I know that's a pretty bold word to say, but once you've accepted your art for your art without worrying about the opinions, and especially if you really believe in it, and if you know that it can help somebody else, that's it. And I read somewhere, I don't remember where, it says, between the stimulus, that thing that happens to you, and the response to that thing is your freedom to choose. Right? So we get to choose how we react or how we make art. And I think so you're right, and I really appreciate you sharing that.
And I think there's something about, it's really about like living in the moment, I think, of the art, of the creative impulse. I say to people, or to young actors or young professionals all the time, like, you cannot be a creator and an editor at the same time. Those are different impulses. And so often what we're trying to do is edit the thing as it's coming out, and in order to make it palatable or packageable or producible or whatever. And those are different impulses.
You're talking to me right now.
Yeah, so don't edit the thing, make the thing, and then step away, and then you can have the distance and the perspective to look at what you've made and decide if you want to change that. But oftentimes we're trying to do them both at the same time out of fear that the unvarnished version is going to somehow embarrass us or, be bad or be ill-received. And they're actually just two very different impulses. Some of the most interesting stuff I've made has been the messiest, and it's not until I have the space and time to look back at it and say, okay, here's how I want to recraft that. But I don't know that I would have found the beautiful heart of it if I had tried to be crafting it while it was coming out of me, I think that's so often in any artistic or creative process. I think the key for people is to get used to being messy, right? write the bad first draft, paint the picture that just comes out of you, perform the monologue as you feel it coming through your body. Will it be its final form? No, but like you have to get the first draft out in order to go to the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth. So I think if people say yes to a messy creative process and allow things to be ugly for a while and get comfortable with that, the less likely we are to feel like imposters,
Right.
and the more likely we are to just feel like creators. And I think that's the goal.
And I want to add to that by saying, for those creators who have been doing it for a while, sometimes we need to zoom out to see how much we actually have done in those moments when we feel as if we were not doing enough.
Yeah.
Right? And I have to remind myself of that almost on a daily basis, especially as people who are very pursuant of have goals artistically. And so all of what you're saying makes complete sense to me, and I'm glad that we're having this discussion. I didn't even plan to ask you that, so thank you.
Improv.
I do have another, and the work we do is very human-centered. And whenever I create musically, not whenever, but a lot of the times I'm thinking about who in my life this can impact. And oftentimes I think about specific people. Who do you perform for? Who do you wish you could perform for? Or who do you miss?
Wow, what a powerful question, Ty. I think I perform for my family, to be honest. So much of who I am as an artist is born out of the family that I come from. I come from an Irish Catholic family who is the family that bursts into song at weird occasions, and ended family parties with dance parties in the living room. And I come from people who are intimately moved and motivated and into making music, and so I recognize that my sense of both music and theater comes from people who are dramatic and musical. And so I think when I'm creating out of that tradition, right? And in a way, creating out of that tradition in order to reflect back to it. It's a way of sort of like both owning where I come from and mirroring back to the people that I love that I got it. I think I perform for my children, obviously. So much of what I make now, and as particularly when I'm directing, so much of what I make now, I think about like what, not that everything, I wouldn't want my kids to go see Hair, but like, nor would they want to go see Hair. Right? But, what do I think will move a person? And it's like, when I think about who that person is I'm trying to move, it's very often an older version of my kids. Or, I don't know if I even do that like all that deliberately, but then I think about like, well, who am I imagining? What's Ezra all grown up, or it's Hazel all grown up, And I think because of that, my work tends to have a sense of wonder in it. I try to create theatrical moments that are wonderful, that sort of explode away from the stage and include the audience and make us think about bigger things than just, human to human drama. Like there's something greater out there. And then who do I miss? I mean, I miss my grandparents. And I think that I created a 6-performer version of The Music Man.
Okay.
And the impetus of that was all of the family plays that I put on, whether at Christmas or Easter or whatever. We would go to my grandparents' house. All the cousins would be in the basement. Sometimes my grandmother would write a play for us to perform, like an original piece that she would write. And we'd make these makeshift costumes, and it would just be whatever was at hand, whatever you could create at hand. And we would utilize those things to go up and like put on a show for the grown-ups, and that like sense of play was so critical for me growing up, like becoming an artist. It's because I came from that like really imaginative place of play. And so the work that I do is very like fundamentally interested in how can we make magic out of what we have here, right? It's just the stuff that's on stage with us. The audience is not behind some fourth wall, right? It's participation between, I want to reduce the distance between actor and audience. That all comes from the plays I put on in my grandmother's basement. And so when I think about the work that I make, like I make it for that tradition, for my grandparents. I make it for my ancestors who came to America from Ireland and brought maybe nothing but the clothes on their back and an instrument, or those kinds of things, and brought with them the stories and the music that they brought. And so that was a big part of it. My grandparents were also like very into our ancestry and traced our family back through Ireland and Ellis Island and all of those things and figured out sort of the where we came from, and kind of gifted that to the whole family. Here's what we discovered where we're from. And so I think that somehow is baked into the kind of work that I make too. It is very connected to the lineage that I descend from. I can feel it in my work.
You feel it in your bones.
Yeah.
I love that, and you also get this opportunity to leave behind a legacy with the work that you do in this way. And Isaac, a lot of people know the name Isaac Lamb, so this is a wonderful lens to see you in, a different lens in terms of it being a little bit more personal and talking a little bit about your family history and your connection to music. And that's what Everybody Has a Song is all about, knowing the human behind the art that we make. And my goal is to not make these episodes too long, so I'm going to ask, because we could talk all day. I know we could.
I know.
But my final question to you then, we're going to wrap up with this one. What is your song?
The song I'm going to sing today is Danny Boy.
Danny Boy.
Yeah. It is St. Patrick's Day today, on the day of this filming. Danny Boy is a song that has an Irish and American history. It was actually written by an Irish American. A lot of people think it's an Irish song, but I think it's really more appropriately called an Irish immigrant song. It's very much about, lyrically, it can be about, you could do it and read an interpretation of it that it's about a soldier going off to war and this question of whether or not you'll see each other again. But I think in the context of when and how it was written, it's very much about families crossing an ocean and being away from home. It's a song that has, like, at its heart, this great sense of like longing. You can feel it in the melody. And it is, I think, for many Irish Americans, a song that makes them feel like connected to this distant past, that although I, am born and absolutely in my bones an American now, that there's a green, verdant land across the ocean that's sort of calling to me. And I think you can feel that in this song and in a lot of the Irish songs that live from that time. And so there's always been something about it that is, like, I found sort of haunting and beautiful. And it very much reminds me of my family. And so that's why I chose it today.
Sing your song.
Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the flowers are falling. It's you must go and I must bide. But come ye back when summer's in the meadow, or when the valley's hushed and white with snow. It's I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny boy, oh, Danny